When you download the Kroger app, you have easy access to savings every day. Shop weekly sales and get personalized coupons to get the most value out of every trip, every time, whether you shop in-store or online. Download the Kroger app now to save big. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Must have a digital account to redeem offers. Restrictions may apply. See site for details.
Save big on your favorites with the Buy 5 or More, Save $1 each sale. Simply buy 5 or more participating items and save $1 each with your card. Kroger, fresh for everyone.
This is Life Admin Life Hacks, a podcast that gives you techniques, tips and tools to tackle your life admin more efficiently, to save your time, your money and improve your household harmony.
I'm Dinah Roberts, an operations manager, and I used my last 2 hours of power to focus on solar power and figure out if it was worth it for us.
I'm Mia Northrop, a researcher and writer whose interest was truly sparked by this topic, and I was shocked to see prices for solar PV systems are still so high.
This episode will equip you with the top questions to ask the next time those solar panel call centre people dial your number.
Hello and welcome to Life Admin Life Hacks. Before we dive into all things solar, we want to thank our latest reviewers. We had Katie119 on Apple Podcasts who said, "So useful and practical. Mia and Dinah are such great hosts." Thanks, Katie. She said, "I've learnt so many super practical time-saving and money-saving tips from this show. Highly recommend." Thank you. We have listeners coming in from New Zealand, the UAE, Hong Kong, Singapore, Austria. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.
And don't forget, our book, Life Admin Hacks, is now on sale. Thanks to Helen McCabe, who said, "My stress levels subsided from the opening page. Do it today." So make sure you buy it from your local bookstore or Amazon, Booktopia, or anywhere books are sold.
So, solar. You might have noticed when you look at your electricity plans or bills that energy retailers will show you the feed-in tariff, which is what you could be saving if you use less energy than your rooftop solar electricity system produced, and the retailer was paying you for your surplus. Or you might have been driven by the environmentally friendliness of renewable energy to check out whether solar energy is going to be a sustainable choice. You might have been telephoned, and be lucky if you haven't, by one of the solar energy call centres who says, "We've got these rebates. Have you got panels? Are you interested?" And once you get past the annoyance of someone cold calling you, you might have wondered whether one day you should actually sit down and work out the pros and the cons and do the maths. Given that electricity prices in Australia are some of the highest in the world, they keep rising, and Australia is also one of the top 10 sunniest countries in the world in terms of our average hours of sun. There are 3 million homes across Australia that now have rooftop solar systems, but there's installation costs in the thousands. It can be tricky to figure out if it makes financial sense for you, and if so, what system should you get, and how to find a reputable installer.
So in this episode, we're going to talk about the things you need to know if you're thinking about installing solar panels, how to decide if solar is worth it for you, and how to maximize your return from your solar panels if you've already got them.
A few years ago, we were travelling in China and we were on the train travelling between different cities. And I remember looking at these cities that we were going past and just seeing solar panels on buildings at a scale that I've never seen in Australia. We certainly have a lot of sun, but I can't say that we've had the progressive political climate to usher in a lot of the renewable energy options that we've seen elsewhere.
Yeah, although I think around where I live, I feel like we've always been the odd ones out. Everyone else seems to have lots of solar panels. So I definitely think there's pockets of Australia where solar has been heavily adopted. And certainly a few years ago, there was really some great incentives, better than there are now in terms of feed-in tariffs and things. So definitely pockets of solar around the country.
Yeah, I grew up in WA, in Western Australia. And there was so many people had the solar hot water. Like that was my first sort of introduction to solar panels, because everyone had those little panel systems that just heat your hot water using the sun there. So for many of us, this is, it's an economic decision, but it's also an environmental one. There are some people who sort of just want to be independent of energy companies. And for some people, it's quite political. I think when we were researching this, and you're researching, like you're going to these various websites, it's clear that there's people who are in the sustainability or renewables or green industries or sectors. And then there's people who are in the what's been called the electricity infrastructure establishment. And there's a little bit of, you need to apply a bit of critical thinking to kind of get past some of the agendas and the arguments that are put forward.
Yeah, so I do think it's probably the first step in when you're thinking about these things is what are your values? Why are you thinking about looking at this? Is it just an economic decision? Is it, an environmental decision? Is it a combination of the two? Or is it actually because of even where you live? Or you're thinking of building a house that you're thinking about going off grid, a standalone system where you're completely disconnected. So I think that's the first step in this decision-making process.
Yeah. So Dinah, you went through the pros and cons, because you were legitimately looking at whether you wanted to get solar installed for your home. So take us through where you started.
Yeah, so I really started with some basic research about understanding how it works so that I felt equipped to really understand what the criteria are I should be thinking about. And I sort of found the Buying Solar Guide from the Clean Energy Council is the best place to go. So we'll put that link in the show notes. But they're like the peak body for clean energy in Australia. So they have really good, easy to understand information.
So when we're talking about solar systems, we're not talking about Earth and the planets revolving around the sun. We're talking about solar photovoltaic. I can't say it. Solar. I've practiced and everything. Photovoltaic systems, which we're now just going to call solar PV, that go on your roof. So they're rooftop systems. They come in different sizes depending on how many kilowatts you want them to pump out. And in your research, most people do this and they opt to have a system that doesn't include a battery. And we'll talk about batteries later.
Yeah, so
have we got that right?
That's right. So most people get grid-connected solar without a battery. So that's what we'll talk about first. We can talk about batteries a bit at the end. So what happens then is when the solar system is producing more energy than your house is consuming, all of your household appliances get powered by your solar panels, and the excess solar energy that's generated by your panels is fed back, exported into the electricity grid for other people to use. And your energy retailer may pay you a feed-in tariff for the use of that electricity.
Okay.
And the opposite is when the solar system is producing less energy than your household needs. So you actually need more power. So that might be particularly at nighttime when the sun is not shining. Then the solar panels, whatever they're generating, you'll use, but then you'll get the additional sort of top-up power from the grid. So you're still connected to the grid. Your solar panels are just helping it along.
Yeah. And that's distinct from people who literally want to be off-grid. So they might have a regional or rural property, or they just want to be self-sufficient if the apocalypse comes, where you have a standalone system that's not attached to a grid, so you don't get a feed-in tariff and you can't export anything. You're just able to use your own energy. That's a different system, yeah?
Yep, completely different.
Got it.
So you also need to understand, like quite early on, to understand what the best conditions are for those solar panels. So it's about making sure that you've got a roof that's facing in the right way. So north facing, ideally, not obstructed by tree shade. And also that the pitch of your roof is the right kind of angle. All of those things are important to note. So understanding what your roof is and then understanding what the optimal conditions are is kind of early piece of research I think you should sort of get your head around.
Yeah. So if you go outside and you realise your roof is south facing, it's particularly high, there's power lines and tree shade, it's at a weird angle, it's not very accessible, so it would cost a mint to install it. Like that's like the first step. You might decide, okay, you know what? This isn't the property for this exercise.
Yeah, but if you're not sure, like the solar companies, certainly I spoke to two in my research, and they were really good at telling me what my roof meant, and they used quite good technology, but we'll get to that in a second. So I think the other thing to be aware of is a kind of basic economics. So before you get started, before you feel tempted to call anyone up, make sure you've got your power bills and you know roughly how much power you use, and think about how much you use in the day versus the night, as well as whether you might be willing to change your consumption patterns, because obviously these solar panels they generate the power during the day. So that means you need to like try and do your washing during the day or your vacuuming during the day, or the things that take lots of power, try and do as many of them in the day if you want to make the most of the panels.
Yeah. And this is where you might think about your appliances. So if you have a washing machine or a dryer or a dishwasher that have timers on them, so you can delay a program, you can put all the stuff in, press the button, but it doesn't kick in till a certain time, then it can help you shift the way you consume your patterns. But it's worthwhile becoming mindful and really monitoring, how is my energy consumption or the household's energy consumption plan out over the day. And in the seasons too, because you have to factor in the heating, air conditioning. If you've got a swimming pool that you heat up, if you've got multiple fridges or a hot water system that is on electricity, how does that consumption change from day to day and season to season?
Yeah. So that's really important, because the most benefit, no matter really where you are, is to be gained from solar using the energy yourself. So that's consuming your solar energy, not from the feed-in tariff back to the grid. Because a few years ago, feed-in tariffs used to be like a money-making exercise, because you used to be able to get like 60 cents per kilowatt hour. But now it's usually around 8 to 12 cents. It does vary depending on where you live. But generally, you really need to think about your own power consumption as the main way of making the most of these panels.
Okay. So you've got your roof, you've got your energy consumption. What else do you have to think about up front?
So I didn't actually think about this up front, but I wish I had, because it would have helped with my decision making. But it was, how long do you plan to stay in your house? And I guess it was only something that occurred to me right near the end of my decision-making criteria.
Oh, how annoying.
Because it was when I started my spreadsheets that, you know what I'm like. I couldn't help but build my own spreadsheet to compare the options. And when I did that, I was like, hang on, all of these quotes are assuming, 10, 15-year kind of investment decisions. But we've actually been talking about selling this house like in 8 years' time. So we really need to think about that, certainly if you're focusing on the economic reasons, because you really need to think about whether it's going to pay off over time.
Yeah. So often when you look at, like, say, Choice has a solar estimator you can use. There's all these calculators, and there's the warranties for the equipment themselves. And, that might be a 10 or a 15-year or a 20-year warranty. If you think you're going to leave that house, you might not get the ROI on the installation and the purchase.
And I also think you need to think about how you're going to pay for the system. So do you just have some money lying around? We're talking, between 5 to 10 grand usually for these systems. So is it money that you might be redrawing out of your home loan? And so you need to also factor in the interest cost that you're going to pay on that amount. Or is it money that you might otherwise be putting into your superannuation or doing something else with? So that might also help you weigh up the investment decision, rather than just, it's usually not just one option. There's usually a few different things or choices you can make about what you want to spend your money on.
Yeah. So getting to terms with the opportunity cost. What else could you be doing with that cash?
Yep.
If it didn't go into this system? Okay.
So once you've really thought through some of that stuff, the next thing to do is actually to go out and get some quotes. So you've done a little bit of research, you know what you're thinking about, but I would suggest you go and get 2 to 3 quotes from providers that are approved by the Clean Energy Council. And there's actually a shortcut there. There's a couple of different organisations like Solar Quotes, where you can actually put your information into their website, and they will actually contact 3 providers who are accredited with the Clean Energy Council that are in your area, and then they will contact you and give you the quote based on the information you've already put into the website. So they've also got quite a good website, Solar Quotes, but it has so much information on it. To be honest, I found it a little bit overwhelming. But if you're super into trying to research to the end of the earth, I also recommend that website for some information.
And so there are rebates out there, right? There are government rebates available. Did you look at them separately, or is that part of the quoting process? Do they come back and tell you which rebates you can get?
They do help you with that. So the providers are definitely on top of that, because it's kind of part of the sales process. But you can also research that ahead of time. So there's websites that will help you. The energy.gov.au website has all the rebates that are eligible based on various income levels and where you live. So you can have a look at that ahead of time. But certainly the 2 providers who I spoke to were 100% on top of all those rebates.
And so that, yeah, energy.gov.au has the federal and state rebates. And if you put in your details there, it'll, it spits out what you're eligible for in your state. And I know Victoria, there's the Solar Homes program. They can give you up to $1,850 if you're an owner-occupier or if you're a landlord. There's low interest loans, but there's eligibility criteria. You have to have, if you own the property or your tenants in the property, have to have a combined taxable income less than 180K. The property itself can't be valued at over 3 million. So there are criteria to check out. And then there's also at the council level, there's different councils have their own program. So again, in Victoria, the local government, 10 councils have this Solar Savers initiative, and that's a bulk buying program. So you're able to access a discount because they've got this bulk buying set up. And again, they've got some quality installers who are accredited and trusted that you can work through. So good to have your head a little bit around that, I guess, before you're going to chat to the suppliers who are giving you the quotes.
Yeah. And there's also the STC scheme, which is super complicated to get your head around. That program is around small scale technology certificate scheme, and it's basically this thing, and then
this is federal, right?
This is federal.
This is Australia. Yeah.
But really the providers almost in all cases sort all that out for you, and the STC credits are included like as a discount in your quote. So it's kind of something you don't really need to know a lot of detail about. You just need to be mindful of looking at how much of the STC credit they're passing on to you as part of their quote.
And what's the ballpark credit are we talking about? Are we talking about like $1,000 or?
Yes, I think mine was like $1,000, $1,500, and it was similar in both of the quotes that I ended up looking at in detail.
Okay, so you'll get your quote. It will include whatever rebates you're eligible for. Then how did you decide?
So one of the things that I looked at in that Clean Energy Council guide was making sure that the quotes took into account the important things. So the first thing is that they actually give you a system design. It was kind of a little bit creepy, actually, because when the quotes came back, they came back with pictures of my house, and they showed me where the panels would be put on the roof. So they used a program called Near Maps, which uses Google Earth to see the shade times at the different time of the year to figure out where they should put the panels to maximise the sun. The quote also should have a performance estimate, itemised list of the components, and a clear breakdown of the costs, as well as what the warranty details are. So those are all things that you should make sure that the quote has before you even look any further.
And is the performance estimate talking about how many kilowatts it's going to produce each day? Yeah.
And so both of these quotes came with these like return on investment and payback periods, which all sounded super amazing. And when I first got them, I was like, well, we should do this. Like, this makes so much sense. But that's when, the devil is always in the detail, because when I, of course, couldn't help myself, tried to recreate their return on investment calculations in my own spreadsheet, that's when I realized that they were looking over 10 plus years time horizon to get that return on investment. It's not really something that, it's not a short-term investment decision. It's a much longer-term investment decision. And so I went down a bit of a rabbit hole researching what happens, what's the impact to your property price from getting solar panels. So would we get our money back? Would our house price go up in value by putting solar panels on the roof? And actually the evidence is it doesn't, except in very rare circumstances. And in some cases, it actually reduces the value of your house because of the aesthetic. So depending on how you put the panels, if they look a bit ugly, then sometimes it puts people off buying the house, not the other way around.
Good to know. Okay. So where did you net out in your decision?
So not only did I, have to readjust all of these return estimations because of this time horizon that we were thinking like we might sell our house, but we also have a bit of a tricky house because it's renovated. So we've got 2 lots of different roof tiles. So one of the things they said to us is, we're going to break at least 30 roof tiles when we install the panels. So that was already like, that's headache time for us. Like, how do we don't have 30 spare roof tiles, and we certainly don't have 30 spare roof tiles for the original part of the house at the front,
Mm-hmm.
which is where people would actually see the roof line.
Mm.
And those tiles are from the 1930s. And the thought of trying to have to source tiles that look the same was kind of like a headache time. But not only that, when I did the proper spreadsheet calculations and looked at it over 8 years, worked out that I'd be way better off financially putting my money into super rather than into solar panels. So, we've decided not to go ahead at the moment because we're not sure how long we'll stay in the house. And we think it's probably a better investment decision to put money into super, and we don't want to have to deal with this hassle with roof tiles.
Yeah. And so I guess the prime time then is if you're about to do your renovation or you're about to buy a new property, because if you're thinking, okay, we're going to be in this house for at least 10 years, then we're more likely to get that return of investment, other things being equal.
Yeah, 100%. So if we'd been making this decision when we did our renovation, which is when we should have done it, which is about 8 years ago now, then 100% we would have put the panels on. But at the time, I think my brain was just too many decisions. And so I just couldn't make one more decision. And so we never looked at it. So, I guess them's the breaks.
If only you'd had a podcast to listen to at that time, Dinah.
That's
that
right.
just told you how to do it. I hope we've nudged some people to embrace solar then, because we do know it's the great way to go in terms of the environment. Okay, so that's just your normal solar PV system. Then there's the whole solar battery thing. Again, this is something that's still quite expensive in Australia. There's about 110,000 homes in Australia that have home storage batteries installed. And I saw a stat that said about 9% of new solar installations last year included a battery. And the benefit of having a battery is that if you create excess energy, then you can actually store it to use at nighttime. So not only can you opt into schemes where you might get that kind of feed-in tariff arrangement with what are they called? There's like virtual power plant schemes. There's ways you can do that. But then you can also just use the energy in the evening or on shady days or in winter or whatever. So again, the batteries, the price, depending on how much capacity they have, they start at about 4,500. They can go up to 18,000, depending on the brand and the capacity. Installation costs extra. And similarly to your normal solar PV system, you have to think about how long it's going to take you to pay back. How long will you be in that house? What's your consumption? All of those decisions need to be factored into this as well. And they say that, again, to get the greatest utility from a battery, you need to ensure that it'll still be able to fully charge from your solar panels so that you actually, in the middle of winter, when you're receiving the lowest amount of sunlight, there should still be enough light to fully charge your battery so you can actually get the most out of it.
And I've read quite a bit about this, actually. The people who make the most out of both the panels themselves and the ones with the batteries are the people who are willing to change their behaviour, who to download the apps, check out that they've got the most energy efficient appliances, really optimise their usage. They do things like making sure they don't run too many appliances at one time, because when you do, then you need to draw from the grid. So they will, for example, not vacuum while they're also using the washing machine and things like that. So you have to really know yourself to know whether this is something you want to, if you're really into it and really wanting to change your behaviour, then that's probably when you should start looking at batteries and really thinking about that might be worth it for you.
There's also rebates for solar batteries. So there are battery programs, rebates that are very specific. They're different from state to state. In Victoria, it was only for designated postcodes that already have high solar PV installations and also population growth. So they're trying to encourage it. My postcode wasn't there. Your postcode wasn't there, Dinah. We're not eligible. But if you are in one of those designated postcodes, then you can get some rebates on that battery. And again, there's a household income tax eligibility criteria of 180K. The property has to be valued less than 3 million, and you can't actually get the battery rebate and benefit from the solar homes program. You have not already benefit from the government in that way. So yes, when I looked at the Solar Choice website and had this very in-depth discussion about batteries, they were saying that, in various scenarios of different usage and different sizes, the benefit from the battery, you won't get that ROI within the warranted lifetime. So these batteries have a certain warranty period, and it usually will take longer than that to see any financial the ROI on that. So if you are being motivated purely by finances, wait a bit longer. Maybe more rebates will come. The prices will drop. We shall be embracing it at some stage.
So the other thing that we mentioned briefly before, but solar feed-in tariffs are something that you might already need to be worrying about if you've already got solar panels. So understanding those are important when you're comparing your electricity bill. And as I mentioned, they have been falling across the board. People are being paid less and less for the electricity they export to the grid, and that makes these payback periods longer and longer. So if you live in an area where you can choose your electricity retailer, you really need to make sure you're taking that into account when you choose your retailer if you've already got panels. You need to think about that the higher the solar feed-in tariff, so i.e. what you get for exporting power, the lower the discount you'll get on electricity the household draws from the grid. So in order to secure the highest solar feed-in tariff, you need to opt for the plan that offers the lowest discount on electricity imported from the grid. So that means if you usually export a lot of power to the grid, you should look for a plan with the best feed-in tariff, and vice versa. If you're only using most of the power your system generates and you're only exporting a tiny bit on occasion, then you should go for the one that's got the highest discount on the power you're using. So really making sure you're taking into account how much you're actually exporting to the grid and not getting sucked into paying too much for the electricity that you do use from the grid if you're only exporting a small amount of power.
And it's worth noticing as well, so if you jump on, if you're comparison shopping, it's worth noticing that in Victoria and Queensland and New South Wales, the way they report around feed-in tariffs is different. So Victoria and Queensland, they talk about net feed-in tariffs. So this means they only apply to the excess electricity that you export. Whereas in New South Wales, they talk about the gross feed-in tariff, which means you get paid for each kilowatt you export, regardless of how many kilowatts you import. Oh, did everyone's heads just explode? And where can you go? I know CanStar, they've got some good comparison shopping tools about feed-in tariffs.
Yeah, I had a bit of a dig around, and CanStar seemed to have the most comprehensive list of the feed-in tariffs. So as always, make sure you scroll to the bottom past the promoted results, and then you'll see the complete list for each state. You can also use the government comparison sites, but when I looked at them, they were quite confusing when it comes into taking account both of the feed-in tariff. And so sometimes the results are a bit hard to understand, whereas the CanStar one presented things in a much better way. So I recommend having a look at CanStar if you've got solar panels already.
Excellent. And we'll link to those sites in the show notes so you can find the appropriate energy site for your state. All right, so Dinah, in summary, I'm gonna guess, what do you think if you buy a new home or your next home? Do you think you'll go down this path if you're going to stay in your next place for more than 10 years?
Yeah, so I'll definitely look at it again as soon as we move. So I think that the next house we buy, it'll be kind of, one of my first hours of power, not 8 years later. And I think then, obviously depending on the rebates and also depending on, the type of roof we have, it's definitely something I would look at again in the future, but just not at the minute.
Okay. So we hope these hacks will make you more likely to investigate whether solar is for you, because we know it is the sustainable choice. Investigate these renewable energies. Our top hacks are: get clarity before you start. Is this going to be a purely environmental or economic decision for you? Or do you want to remove yourself from the grid? Get local. Understand the rebates and feed in relevant to your actual location, and get real about your energy consumption. Decide if you're willing to change your behaviours and whether your household can change behaviour to make the most of the investment. Thanks for listening. Show notes for this episode are available at lifeadminlifehacks.com. And if you're a fan, please subscribe and share the love and tell a friend, or review us in your podcasting app. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
When you download the Kroger app, you have easy access to savings every day. Shop weekly sales and get personalized coupons to get the most value out of every trip, every time, whether you shop in-store or online. Download the Kroger app now to save big. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Must have a digital account to redeem offers. Restrictions may apply. See site for details.
Save big on your favorites with the Buy 5 or More Save $1 each sale. Simply buy 5 or more participating items and save $1 each with your card. Kroger, fresh for everyone.